Welcome, curious minds, to Danny's Cosmic Adventures, and thank you for tuning in. Tonight, we have a very special guest, and I'm already excited to have a nice chat with him, guys. Here with us is author and speaker John Olsen. Growing up in his family's old farmhouse built in the mid-1880s, John's childhood was anything but ordinary. From a young age, he encountered peculiar occurrences, from phantom knocks to the sound of loud boots running up the stairs, and even mysterious disappearances of objects. However, it was his encounters with what he refers to as the man in the hat that truly sparked his fascination with the paranormal. So, fueled by his own experiences, John has dedicated the past 30 years to investigating and documenting first-hand accounts of the strange and unusual across the western United States. His Stranger Bridgerland series chronicles chilling tales of ghosts, encounters with monsters, haunting phenomena, glitches in the Matrix, encounters with Sasquatch, and even sightings of UFOs. There's a lot to discuss today, guys, so without further ado, here is John Olsen. Nice to meet you again, John.
Yes, thanks for having me on. This is great.
You're welcome, thank you. You've got a new book coming out soon, right?
Yeah, so my new book comes out in May. It'll probably be a little bit closer to the end of May. I'm just wrapping it up right now. And it's called Stranger Utah. This one will have stories just from Utah. Because I happen to have collected a lot of those lately. And this is where I started, so I had a lot of them too. And it's got some ghost stories in it. It's got cryptids, a couple stories of what I call ridge watchers, or these are shadows in the mountains that at dusk they will show up and just watch people, which is really creepy. But yeah, so it's a plethora of all different kinds of paranormal things, and it's all first person and true paranormal, because everything that goes into my book, I have to, interview the person that it came from, and so yeah, it's been a lot of fun to put together.
Sounds good. I just purchased one of your books today. Actually, it's called Stranger World, and there's a lot of cases from all over the world in this book. So also awesome. I'm looking forward for the new book.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, you'll have to let me know how you like Stranger World, so when you read it.
Yeah, I had the chance to read a few of the stories so far. Very good. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much.
To give people a little bit more background on you, and I know we've talked about it before in another podcast, but please tell us what it was like to grow up in a haunted house.
Yeah, so that's really where this all started. I grew up in a home that was built in 1883, and in my part of the United States, that's really early. That's really old for this part. And it was an old farmhouse that my parents purchased it from family members. It had been in my family since the 1920s, and so it was 100 years old when I was a kid in the 80s. And there was a lot of strange stuff that went on in the house. I saw everything from full body apparitions to things moving, footsteps, voices in the hall, and interactive things like the ghost at times would mimic my mother or my dad's voice to call me into another room, and they wouldn't be there. And everybody in the family has had experiences. My parents still own the home, so growing up, my kids had experiences in the house as well. And so, growing up, just having all of these really strange experiences got me very interested in the paranormal. So for a long time as a kid, I just studied everything I could about the paranormal. And then as I became a teenager, a lot of my friends had experiences in my house, and I had to finally admit, yeah, I live in a haunted house. And so they wanted me to tell stories, which I did. And before long, people were bringing me their story, and I was trying to hunt down people's stories. And so I've been studying the paranormal, interviewing people, and all of this for 30 years now, gathering different stories and learning everything I can about the paranormal. So,
Man, when you said these voices was mimicking your mom and your dad's voice to lure you in another room, that sounds very crazy.
yeah, it was at the time it was very creepy. It's funny that now, even now, if I go there and have an experience, it's much more I guess exciting for me. It's less scary than exciting because when you grow up in that situation, I guess you get used to it. But yeah, at the time, at times when I was a kid, it was definitely very scary, especially when, your mom calls you to the kitchen and you go in, your mom's not in the kitchen. So you go find her and she says, "No, I never called you." And so it's it can be when especially when you're a kid, it can be very disorienting and scary, but
Yeah, guess so. That brings up a question, but we will talk about that later. The question is, do we have to be afraid of these phenomena? But let's talk about that later. Um,
okay.
I recently listened to some of my old episodes on the podcast, and there's one that stood out to me. It's the story of Jack Wills and his family, and it reminded me a lot of what you told me. Jack is a comedian from, I believe, Philadelphia, a young guy, and he told me about how when he was quite young, his family moved into a new house and experienced strange things there. It sounds like many other ghost stories at first. They all start that way. A family moves in a new house and things happen. Sounds like a horror movie, start of a horror movie. But when they moved in, they found some sort of, let's call it closet behind a drywall, and they uncovered it. That's when things start to happen. Members of the family began to see ghosts and faucets starting running around without human intervention, stuff like that. It was like, yeah, something straight off a horror movie. The encounter with the apparition of a little girl in a white dress was especially intense. That's what he told me. So they saw, yeah, the ghost of a little girl in a white gown. At some point, Jack felt compelled to investigate this closet and forcibly open a wooden box that was built into this closet that I was talking about. It wasn't just a dumb idea, he said, but it was kind of a strong inner urge to open this strange box that was built into this closet. So it was very strange. And in the box, he found an old belt buckle. He found a lid from a very old cigar box. And in this box, he found pictures. And that's creepy. In these pictures, you could see a woman. It's a very old black and white photo. I would classify it between 1890 and 1910 if I would have to. So it's like I said, very old picture. It's creepy that Jack said the woman in the picture looks very similar to his mother when she was young. And he said maybe that's the reason this ghost of the young child would reveal itself only to her. And furthermore, he found two pictures featuring a little girl, and this girl strongly resembled what the family had seen in the house. So, very strange. Do you believe that the phenomenon of hauntings knows who is afraid and who seems to be sensitive, maybe? And do you think this phenomenon seeks out and targets such individuals?
Yeah, I do. I think that a lot of times when they realize that somebody out there can sense them or see them, they will kind of latch on or try and get their attention for sure. It's funny that you mentioned a little girl in a white dress. In my new book that's coming out, I have a story of a woman and her husband were looking for a house, and they'd been to several different houses with the real estate agent, and they happened to come to this really old home that had been renovated, and the the realtor goes out to talk to a guy that's outside, and her husband are looking around the house, and her husband goes to the garage and she starts hearing this little girl singing and just kind of humming, singing, and she follows it downstairs into this really old cement basement, and there's a little girl in a white dress in the middle of the floor, and she's like, "Where, what are you doing down here?" And this little girl looks at her over her shoulder and just says, you don't want to buy this house. I'm not the only one that lives here, and then disappears in front of her.
Whoa.
So yeah, I think, and that might have been a warning that there's more people in the house or whatever. And obviously she left and they immediately, but I do think that especially, in that case, the little girl could sense that the lady could see her and was warning her that she doesn't live there alone and the other ones aren't nice. And so yeah, I think most definitely when people are more sensitive to it, they can run into it more often because the ghosts realize that, I might be able to communicate with this person. So
Hmm. So you think it's about communication?
sometimes I honestly my biggest thing is that you in my belief system or whatever, and in my searchings, that your same personality goes on with you. So, if you were a good person in this world, on the other side of the veil, you're a good person. And so I think the vast majority of hauntings, when it's just somebody who was alive and isn't alive anymore, I think the vast majority of them are probably really just good people and maybe doing it not knowing they're scaring people, or just trying to get something across. Message, sometimes it's a message. And then, but it's really like 1 out of 10 people here that you run into as a real kind of jerk. Probably it's the same on the other side. 1 out of 10 ghosts, probably, I would say, is just a real jerk and may want to um, cause you harm or scare you or get you out, or, something of that nature. So,
Hmm. That brings me back to something we've talked about earlier, and um, you said these voices were mimicking your mom and your dad and lured you in another room, in the kitchen, maybe. In movies, this could be a quite dangerous situation. Uh, We're not in a movie, of course, but in a movie, yeah, people die this way. So, do you think we should be, or one has to be afraid of these phenomena? Could this be dangerous? Do you experience dangerous situations while you were living in that house?
no, I don't think that, like in particular, my house that I grew up in, that spirit, because I know there was probably more. I know there was more than one, but the one that liked to play pranks, really, we all kind of believe it was coming from a place of just a prankster, somebody who liked to play pranks in, real life, and now they love to play pranks on the other side, because nothing was really malevolent or evil about it. Though as a kid it was scary, of course, but I think that for the most part, because I've also helped several people who've, because of the work I do, they've contacted me with, they say, I think I have a ghost or I have this going on. And the vast majority, when it's just somebody who's passed on, it's sometimes a misunderstanding. It's something they want to get across, and then they generally leave them alone. Um, but excuse me. But if you get more into the, inhuman or demon kind of stuff, which I believe that really can't harm you unless you invite it into your home, into your life. Um, but when it comes to ghosts, I think they're not really that dangerous. It can be very scary, but dangerous not necessarily. I'm more afraid of the living than I am the dead, personally. So,
Yeah, I sometimes ask myself if they know that they are scary, or if they're just doing what they're doing and wondering, hey, why they're running away, or why they're acting this way. Yeah,
yeah, definitely.
we've talked about the ghost of the little girl, and I think you mentioned something like the white lady or so. Um, we have stories about the white lady all over the world. During your research in the field of the paranormal, did you come across any clues on how stories like that arise all over the world? What's the origin?
A lot of times it has to deal with a tragedy that happened in it, like when they have a lot of places will, like you say, have a vision of a white lady, somebody in a white dress. And um, I think that it has a lot to do with the history of each place. Oftentimes, there's a story attached to it of somebody who, um, say, for example, was going to get married, and their husband or their fiance was lost at sea, and now she walks the beach waiting for him to come back. Um, and so I think that a lot of times when there's a tragedy attached to a spirit, they can show up like that. They can relive the same thing over and over again. For example, in I believe the Tower of London in England, um, one of the he, Henry's wives that was executed can be seen running down the hallway, where she ran down the hallway to plead for her life at his door, and she's seen doing that over and over again. And that has a lot to do with, I believe, one, the history, and obviously the emotion that was in that. She was pleading for her life. I'm sure she was scared to death. And that can make an imprint on the I guess you call it a psychic imprint there, where it may just show up over and over and over again because of it. So
Yeah, well, that's quite interesting what you just said. Some ghost apparitions, they are like a movie. Those ghosts seem to do the same thing over and over again every night, and they don't recognize you. You could stand there, but they don't recognize you. And some ghost apparitions, they seem to interact with you or try to interact with you. So there's a
mhm.
difference, right?
Yes, yeah. So the ones that kind of play over and over and over again are they're a certain type of haunting. It's called I've lost the name of it, but they basically, like you say, happen over and over again, regardless of whether people are there, and they don't interact with people. And so then you have the next level, which are ghosts that will interact with you, um, that seem to see you, will try and talk to you. And that's the ones that ghost hunters get on their recorders all the time, because they're actually answering questions. So, and then generally the next level is what they call like a poltergeist, where they can actually move things and slam doors and move objects. And so there's definitely different levels to the paranormal.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I know that the perception of hauntings and fear is subjective, but have you ever delved into Japanese ghost stories? Especially old tales and mythology can sometimes be very hard to bear, but it's still fascinating. I really love this shit. So these stories can be very disturbing sometimes and seem to really get into your psyche. I don't know what it is, but Japanese mythology and ghost stories are very wild.
Yeah, they really are. And it's it's interesting because of how they perceive ghosts and the paranormal, because of the culture. I mean, the culture is a little bit different everywhere, but in Japanese culture, it's often, there's not really a good time to see a ghost, or it's not a good omen at all. Um, I have a few stories that I'm trying to hunt down the original person in Japan, but so they're kind of secondhand stories where I can't quite put them in my books because I haven't talked to the person yet. But um, a few of them were, the years after that tsunami in the town, the massive tsunami that wiped out the town. There were several uh, cab drivers that at night will pick up people who are soaking wet and try to go back home but disappear on the way back. And these are supposedly the spirits of the people that died in the tsunami. And yeah, I like you say, they've got such a rich culture. I love the Japanese culture as well, and their ghost stories and everything. They also have some cryptids that are really amazing. So yeah, I would definitely agree that Japan has got some just amazing stories.
Yeah, they got the wild stuff. I I sometimes talk about the suicide forest. It's also very wild. Um, it's there's this forest known as the Suicide Forest, as I said already. It's a dense woodland located at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan, I think, and it has gained notoriety as a site of numerous suicides over the years. A lot of people go in there to hang themselves or die in some kind of way. Yeah, legend has it that the souls of those who have taken their own lives cannot find peace and haunt the forest. So people go there to look for ghosts, I guess.
Yeah. And it's funny because even when I watch a show about that, I would love to go there just just to kind of get the feeling of it. Um, but even when I watch it on TV, it has such a heavy feeling, if that makes sense. Just such a heavy feeling of sadness. I can only imagine with that many people going there to do that, there's no way that there isn't some sort of paranormal going on, ghosts going on there just because of the number of people, like you say, that have gone there to commit suicide. And the other thing is it's very easy to get disoriented and lost in there as well. So
Right,
it's very spooky.
right. And I sometimes wonder how this forest, how this whole story with the forest started. I mean, I, I don't think it always was some kind of suicide forest. It started somewhere, and then people started going in there to take their own lives. So is it the forest that attracts the people, that maybe calls the people in there, people that are maybe some kind of weak thinking about suicide? Is it some kind of call? It's very strange. There are a lot of strange places around the world. I can tell you that,
Yeah, definitely.
and
For sure.
especially forests. There's this forest in Romania. I think we've talked about in the other podcast. Also, very strange forest.
Yeah, that one is a very, very haunted forest as well. That one's on my list as well of places that I want to visit. So, another one here in the States is um, it's a mountain here. Oh, it's actually a dormant volcano, and it just lost me. But which make it kind of is strange too as well because Mount Fuji is a dormant volcano, and it makes you just wonder if there's a connection there somehow with the type of rocks that are there and if they can hold energy. It's the paranormal just is very strange and can take you on all kinds of turns. So.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder what makes a haunted place a haunted place. So what is it? Is there something in the water? Is there something in the air? Why a specific area? And this is crazy. And I've talked to a guy here in Germany, a book author and a book publisher. He told me the story of how he went to France with his back then girlfriend, I think. And they saw this little, very small village with obviously very poor people standing around, children with worn out clothes and stuff. Next year, they traveled to the same spot and the village was gone. So he asked locals what happened to this little village, and they said, there is no village. There never had been a village. So he thought he was trapped in some kind of, I don't know, portal or time anomaly. That's
Yeah.
strange. But why this location? Why and why at that time and not always? And this is strange to me.
Yeah, it is. And some of those stories like that, which I would consider like a glitch in the matrix or, a time travel story, they're just so fascinating to me. There's a road in Liverpool, England that happens to people a lot, that very same thing. Multiple people have been walking down that road, and then all of a sudden it's the shops and the cars from the 1960s or 1950s. And then they walk a little further and it goes right back to their time. And it's very interesting because it's the same place and it's happened to multiple people. So it makes you wonder if there aren't some sort of folds in space or, some sort of rips in time that people slip through. And because I've interviewed people who've had very similar experiences. I interviewed a gentleman who he was in Montana and he was hunting deer, him and his buddy, and he was sitting on the mountain where he could watch for the deer, but most of the time he could see into the valley where he lived, and it was really cloudy. They were waiting for the clouds to pass, and there was an opening in the clouds that came through, and he looked at the valley, and he didn't see his town or anything like that. He saw um, just one ranch, and he looked with his binoculars. It was a ranch on a dirt road with just cattle and just like an old farmhouse, and then in the distance he could see an encampment of some sort. It almost looked like a military encampment, but the city was gone, the road was gone. And he sat there, and then the clouds came back, and then when they finally cleared again, then he could see his town, the roads, the main road, everything that used to be. Um, and so he kind of had this window in time that he was able to look through for a short time. And he was looking back into the 1800s when there was only like one or two people that had settled. And that was actually a military camp that had been on that side of the valley for a little while. So yeah, those kind of stories I really love because they're also very rare stories, but they're fascinating.
Yeah. And stories like that makes you wonder if all those things people experience are meant for us to explore and to see. I mean, or is it by accident? But one would think that whoever created all this here is perfect.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's just sort of a lucky few that get chosen to see that, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure why it happens, but I would love to have it happen to me. I'll put it that way. I would love to be able to have a vision through time like that. That would be cool.
Yeah. Or a time travel also.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. I would love to go on a time travel. I would love to go. I would love to see the dinosaurs, of course, because I love dinosaurs. But I want to see the future. Not 100 or 1,000 years. I want to go a million years into the future and see if we're
Yeah.
still there
Yeah.
and what we achieved. So,
Yep.
what do you think about the nature or source of the paranormal? How do you see this phenomena, all these phenomena? Personally, I believe that there is much more behind it than just someone dying and their soul wandering restlessly. I think there's a lot more to the story.
Yeah, I do too. I think that we're just barely being able to scratch the surface of what's possible out there and what's going on. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to the paranormal, whether it's UFOs or cryptids or ghosts or all of it all together or glitches in the matrix. It's that feeling that we get where it's just the unknown, and we want to learn and want to know what's going on. So we're kind of driven. It's the same thing like when our ancestors wanted to just see what was on the next side of the mountain, over on the other side of the mountain, that kept us exploring. It's that same explorer inside of all of us that wants to learn more and grow and so, sometimes people love to explore the paranormal because they love that thrill of getting scared, a little scared in a safe way, if that makes sense. And, but again, it's just that drive for us to understand things that are out there that we don't quite understand yet.
Yeah, I agree. It seems that death is part of life and vice versa, of course. And for some reason, it's possible for these two worlds or realities to sometimes blend or intersect. Why this is, we don't know, not yet. But as I said, there is much more to it. And all of this also includes other phenomena, as you stated already, such as UFOs or other high strangeness. Over time, I have changed my opinion on this. It's not all nuts and bolts. Man, I'm a big UFO guy. And to me, only nuts and bolts were the real deal. I want to see a UFO, knock on it, and alien gets out of a door and greets me. But yeah, it's way more than that. We may be dealing with interdimensional or multidimensional phenomena or something completely different. This could all be happening on a completely different level of reality that exists parallel to our own, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Especially when it comes to, like you say, UFOs. Um, I always kind of scoff when I talk to somebody and they're like, "Oh, we can't have people visiting us because it's impossible to travel faster than light," or, and I think about the fact that, what was it? 150 years ago we didn't have flight, and now we've been to space, so it's so quickly we've been able to expand our horizon. um to say that something is impossible, it kind of isn't. In a way, you're scoffing at everything we've done so far, because there were a time when people said man would never fly. That was impossible, but it is possible, very possible now. So I think it's about just keeping your mind open and keeping your eyes out, and being willing to learn, like you said. It's 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 just amazing what's going on in the world right now, especially along the lines of UFOs, with governments slowly coming out and saying, yeah, there are UFOs, and um, this is what we know, and just slowly coming out with it. So
Yeah, what's strange is that whenever we come a little bit closer to uncovering this phenomena, something strange happens. Just like the jellyfish UFO. You heard about it, I guess.
mhm.
So, what is this phenomena trying to tell us? It looks very strange, behaves very strange. Some even said it was bird shit on the camera. So, uh, man,
Yeah,
so it was only seen on the infrared camera, I think, and yeah, it dove into the water and then came up again and flew away like very
yeah.
fast. And the look alone, what kind of phenomena we're dealing with here? It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. And it's just amazing to me too, the things that go on, the stories that I've collected from people. And yeah, I really think it's an exciting time to be alive, just because of the fact that, we're learning more, we're able to see more, like you say, the jellyfish one and the Tic Tac one that the US government chased. And it's amazing to me too, when you get down into it and you start looking, the number of people throughout, the last 100 years who have interacted with, aliens or people who've landed. And it's a group of people, and you know, it's just kind of hidden, like the school children in Africa, when they were out playing. I can never remember the name of the school, but all of the kids saw it. All of the kids had memory and interaction with it. There was one just like that happened in Brazil as well, where multiple people saw it. And it's hard to cover up something like that when so many people see it and so many people have that experience. So,
Hmm. It was the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, that's it.
very interesting. I had the chance to talk to a witness. That's, yeah, also high strangeness, man. High
Yeah, it
strangeness.
is definitely.
And I also believe that we ourselves, each and every one of us, are heavily involved in this phenomena. I think humans are a direct link between our reality and the other. It may have a lot to do with maybe consciousness or the manifestation of thoughts, maybe. I don't know, but the idea becomes more and more appealing to me. So, yeah, let's talk about the UFO phenomena. Look at the UFOs in the 70s or 60s. Look at they always seem to fit the zeitgeist or the fashion of the time. Look at the shape of the UFOs in the 70s. Look at the shape of the UFOs in the 80s, in the 90s, and now we have these triangles and we have spheres and we have it always seemed to fit the zeitgeist. And that's crazy. So maybe
Yeah.
it's something to do with ourselves.
Yeah, it could have something to do with our perception. And one thing that I go back to all the time is, one of the original, or like one of the very first sightings of the UFO was a pilot that was flying out of Boise, Idaho, and he witnessed three or four different unidentified flying objects, UFOs, flying, and the shape of it was actually a boomerang. But when he explained how they flew, he said it was like a saucer skipping across the water. Well, and what's really fascinating is a lot of the sightings after he said a saucer skipping across, even though what he saw was triangle or was a boomerang shape, then a lot of people started witnessing um, the saucer shape, the round shape, and the pictures were the round shape. So,
Hmm.
like you say, you wonder if your mind is just trying to perceive what your eyes are seeing, because really it's just a connection of what your eyes are seeing in your brain, and your brain is trying to um put it in a context for you. And like you say, maybe, for a while they're round, they're circular, and then square, and who knows? It's just kind of our perception of what we're seeing. So,
Yeah, very interesting. I have to think about the documentation that I saw. It was about thoughts and the placebo effect. I think this is a good example to explain what I meant earlier. The placebo effect is when persons' expectations and beliefs about a treatment, for example, or a substance, can have a noticeable impact on their physical or mental health, even if the treatment itself has no pharmacological effect. So, manifestation of thoughts refers to the idea that persons' thoughts, beliefs, and intentions can create or influence reality. That's interesting.
yeah.
So, there were studies that have found out that people who visualize, let's say, positive outcomes before a surgery, such as being able to engage in sports again and travel afterwards, tend to recover faster than those who approach the surgery with fear and negative thoughts, which you sometimes have, of course, if you have a surgery. Um, yeah, so that's the power of your thoughts. And I think, so I believe that we ourselves are actively involved in the emergence of various phenomena, maybe. Maybe. I don't
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree with that. And um there's a huge belief, system out there of people who work with intention. They keep, positive things in their mind, and to attract positive things into their life. And I would agree with that, at whatever level that you believe. I just know that, people with a positive attitude tend to have positive things come to them. And if you dwell too much on negative things, the very same thing will happen. So, you know, for example, if you worry all week that your car is going to break down and then it breaks down, was that you perceiving that your car was going to break down, or was that your negative feelings going out to the universe and it affected your car breaking down? It's the chicken or the egg kind of a thing. But I definitely believe that being positive will draw positives to you. And it's the same thing with perception. Um, it we're not just physical beings. I really believe we're not just physical beings, and that we affect everything around us as well, with our attitude, and with how we interact with other people in the world. I hope that makes sense. It seems a little vague, but I hope that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult to explain for me also. Sometimes I don't know how to express my my crazy thoughts.
Right.
I think a lot about consciousness. And you're absolutely right. We're more than just this body. And when we die, something stays there. So I don't know. What do you think about the consciousness? Where is it?
That's a good question. It's somewhere in here. I do believe it, like you say, it's more than just our physical being. But yeah, I in my personal belief, we have, a physical body, and like a physical soul inside of us. Whether you can measure that or not, or where it is in your body, I'm not sure. But I do believe that. And like you say, when you die, I believe that you take a lot of that with you as well. So um, and I take the good, you take the good and you take the bad with you for sure. So um, it's a great question.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's a it's the question for me. It's an interesting
Yeah.
question. Um, in case you hear a strange noise, I'm getting attacked constantly by a big fly here. Yeah. Um,
Uh,
let's talk about your books a little bit. Let's talk about a few stories in your books. Um, but first, because we've talked about consciousness and stuff like that, did you investigate the topic of astral travel or out of body experience?
I have not had a lot of those. I have had a few stories of people who basically had loved ones that came back to say goodbye to them or talk to them. Um, and, I've had different stories of people, um, like I say, interacting with those who have died before and, you know, having visions. I would love to have, some more stories of people who have astro traveled or gone, left their body to go somewhere else and visualize. I just don't have a lot of those, but like I said, I've had a lot where people have talked to loved ones who've come back to say goodbye to them. So,
Oh, that's interesting.
mhm.
You ever tried to go on an astral travel or an out of body experience?
I've tried meditating before. Yeah. I have ADHD, so sometimes it's really hard for me to do stuff like that. But I would love to try that actually. Try and meditate or try and delve into that a little bit further and do astral traveling. That would be I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, I can totally relate with the ADHD. Me too. And sometimes it's even very hard for me to read a book. So that's a hard.
Yeah. And speaking of which, that's kind of why, I wrote my books in the way that I did. Instead of just taking one or two story and doing a real full-fledged out book about one or two stories, I have like between 25 and 28 stories in each one because with my ADHD, I love the fact that you can sit down and just read a story before you go to bed or read a story, because you get a beginning, middle, and end, and it keeps people like me enthralled through the whole story. Because, like you say, I struggle sometimes to read books too if it's very doesn't keep me interested all the way through. So that's kind of why I wrote the books the way I did with many different stories, getting into the meat and bones as quick as I can, just to help people keep interested in it.
Yeah, maybe that's the reason why I like the way you wrote your books. Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, I was a big fan of Perry Rhodan back then. I've loved these Perry Rhodan novels, and I read a lot of these novels. But nowadays, I can't concentrate anymore. I'm reading 5 or 6 pages, and when I close the book, ask me what I did read. I
Yeah.
can't tell you. I don't know. It's impossible. That's why I love audiobooks. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. Talking about your books, tell us about your books. I've mentioned that I just purchased Stranger World,
Yes.
and you mentioned that you know of a few interesting cases from Japan. Are there some cases from Japan in this book?
Not in this book, no. I do have some. I have one from Germany in there. Um, that one was there was a kid. He's actually an American. His dad was in the military, and they were stationed in Germany. And I apologize, I don't have any of the names in front of me, but um, he was going to school at um, this high school that was there for the kids that were on base and some of the kids that weren't on base. But it was originally part of a hospital during World War II, and um, he was in class one day, and he said, he had to go to use the restroom. Asked his teacher if he could go. Was walking down the hall, so it's the middle of the day in school, and a gentleman walked out of the door in front of him as he's in the hallway, and it was a German soldier who was half of his face was gone. He was obviously injured, everything. He looked at the kid, and the kid looked at him, and they were both kind of in shock, and he just kind of wandered over and then disappeared into the next door. And he ran right to the principal's office, called his mom, went home, just in complete shock. But that's when, later on he found out that that school was very haunted because of different things that had happened during World War II. And they eventually closed down the school or tore it down, but he had a lot of detail about, the injuries that this soldier had, and um, the effect it had on him because, I'd asked him if he was see-through, and he said it was very detailed. And the thing I liked about it is it was the middle of the day. He wasn't looking for ghosts. He just ran into one.
Hmm.
And so yeah, that was the one that I had gotten from Germany that I really liked. Obviously, it's a lot more detailed than the book, but I really liked that. And it's just great to get stories from all over, including Germany. So,
I hear stories about ghosts that are seen on battlefields. I hear them very often. Do you think this is a thing? Yeah.
oh yeah, if you think about the trauma and the emotion and people losing their life, a lot of battlefields will be, extremely haunted. And I've gotten quite a few stories of people who have run into soldiers, all over the place. Um, I know here in the United States, Gettysburg, which is where one of the biggest battles during the Civil War happened, is very haunted. There's a lot of stories that go on there. There was one, it's not in my book, but it was one that I had read from someone else, how um, this family was touring the field, and um, they came back to the office where I guess the Rangers and everything were, and they were just talking about how awesome it was that they had a recreation of the battle out there. And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, they we watched the recreation of the battle, and people were shooting and everything." And they're like, "We don't have that here." And they went back with the family, and there's nobody out there, but they watched part of the battle and they thought it was a recreation. So,
Oh, damn.
and the whole family saw it. So that's kind of amazing.
I sometimes wonder why those poor souls from the soldiers, why they are trapped to the battlefield. It's not a good place to be, a nice place that you want to stay. So
No,
I don't know.
yeah. In those cases, sometimes I hope it's one of those that, like you say, is an imprint that just kind of plays over and over again, and they're not stuck there. But I think maybe it was so traumatic, some of them are stuck there. So who knows? Some of them, I know there's stories of ghosts that don't want to believe that they're dead, and so that's why they kind of wander where they're at, and so
Yeah.
could be. So,
They don't realize they're dead. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
strange. And you know, when people talk about cemeteries, and that's a classic.
Hmm.
Those um those paranormal investigators, they always go to the cemetery with candles and their fancy things they bring along. I always think I don't believe that on the cemetery there is a lot of activity because people don't die there. People are brought there.
Yeah.
They die at home or on the street or like I said on the battlefield, something like that.
Hmm.
Why would there be activity on the cemetery?
I did interview one gentleman who was a caretaker of a cemetery. But what was funny was when, for example, when he saw a ghost there, he was locking up, closing the gate, and he noticed a woman standing there. And he's like, "Oh, I didn't see her." And he goes to talk to her, and she's in a long dress, and she won't really talk to him. And then when he looks over his shoulder and looks back, and she disappears. But from his perspective, it looked like she was visiting her husband's grave somehow. So, which was interesting that way. It wasn't her grave that she was there for. It was like her husband's. So, yeah,
Hmm.
but I totally get what you're talking about. Yeah. That's more of a place where your body would be laid. And like you say, at least for my case, it's more about where you lived. And for a lot of the ghosts, like that's why older homes may be haunted, or
Yeah,
places that they loved or spent a lot of time at. So,
I think those stories about the cemeteries they were created
mm,
because cemetery is a little bit scary to a few people. I like
um,
cemeteries. I like walking over cemeteries. I like looking at these nice gravestones and stuff. It's
mhm.
interesting place, peaceful place. That's my
It
opinion.
really is. Yeah, I thought I was the weird one because my wife and I like to go and just walk around cemeteries and see the gravestone, and you think about what time they lived and what kind of life they may have had back then and how it was different. But
No, if you ever should visit Germany, you should go to Cologne. There's a very big and very famous cemetery there, very big. A lot of celebrities there, and also a Titanic survivor.
oh wow.
Interesting, a very, very big, yeah, very big
That
gravestone. Interesting, with an
that's
interesting story.
very
This guy has an
cool.
interesting story. Yeah, very cool. So let's talk about your new book a little bit, Stranger Utah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, what kind of stories are in there? Give us one or two.
So yeah, I'm really kind of excited about this one because I got going and I had some stories, and then I put some feelers out and tried to find some people, and I found some fascinating stories. One of them that I actually got contacted by this gentleman, and in the 1970s, during the 70s, he was an archaeologist for a university. He was still in the 70s on one of his first digs in southern Utah. He was still going to school, but finishing up his degree in archaeology, and um, they were working on an Anasazi ruins down there near the Four Corners of Utah, and they started having incidents where if they stayed till dark, then these giant orbs of balls of energy would show up about the size of a basketball. And then when they left, these orbs would seem to chase them out of the area. And one night he was the last one there, and he's working and it's getting to be darker, and he hears footsteps going around the dig, and he starts getting really nervous because it seems like big, heavy footsteps. And so, he gets up and starts cleaning up his stuff, and he gets more and more nervous, and he's heading towards his vehicle, and he can hear the footsteps behind him. And so he just hurries as quick as he can to his car and takes off and leaves. And the next morning, he got a hold of the head archaeologist that was in charge of the whole dig, and the two of them went back, and they found these huge wolf tracks, and the wolf tracks came around, and then they followed him back to his car. And then after he had left, the wolf tracks started off off in towards the desert. And so they just followed the tracks for a little while to see what was going on. And because I mean, there are no wolves anymore down there, and especially at this time, there weren't anything like this. And he said as he followed the tracks, they morphed from wolf tracks into human barefoot tracks. Like after, it goes through a few steps, it kind of morphed from this wolf track, four legs to two legs, bare feet, and then is running off into the desert. And it really freaked him out. And the professor that was there with him, the other archaeologist that saw it, he didn't want to talk about it. And the guy that was in charge after seeing that made the rule that nobody was going to be there. You had to be there an hour after light, and you have to be out of there an hour before it gets dark. That's how we're all going to work. And those are the rules. Don't break the rules. And so it was really fascinating to me because To me, that sounds like a skinwalker, definitely. And what I loved about it is the fact that I got this from, an archaeologist, somebody who's rooted in science, somebody who's, tries to look at things from a scientific point of view and yet had this paranormal experience that he couldn't explain.
Wow, man, those Skinwalker stories are very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if there's something to it, really. Hmm. But
Yeah.
there are old stories about the Skinwalkers, right?
Hmm.
Like very old
Yeah.
stories, right?
Yeah. That and the history of it is back when the Utes and the Navajo used to war all the time. These were two different tribes. Um, the um, some of the medicine men on both sides turned to basically dark magic. Went too far with it, and then you transform actually basically from a medicine man into a skinwalker, which is using really the wrong kind of things, and they're able to transform and shapeshift, and so it's it's kind of cool and fascinating all at the same time, but and scary for sure.
A time ago, I wasn't too sure about a few of these phenomena. When I heard, I mean, Bigfoot stories made me giggle a little bit, and these dogman stories, and there's even a goat man and a pig man
Yeah.
and a mothman. And I always thought, man, these are urban legends, just like these black-eyed kids. But over the time, I came to the conclusion that, man, everything is possible. I really don't know. You really can't tell, especially the Dogman stories. There are people doing serious research on Dogman, presenting footprints and
Hmm.
stretch marks and whatnot. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Dogman.
And it's funny because when I started, collecting stories and stuff, the black-eyed kids and, uh, dogmen like you that, I, I was a lot like you thinking, I was wondering if I was actually going to get any first-person stories about that. And I got one story from around this area about black-eyed kids. And when I published that in one of my first books, it really shocked me the number of people in this part of the country that contacted me with stories about that. Um, and it was actually a lot more prevalent than I thought, especially this part of the country, which, I didn't know. And right here in this little valley that I live in, I think I have like five stories just from this little area of black-eyed kids. And I thought too, kind of like you, that that wasn't something that was so prevalent, or, maybe it was something that, somebody had made up or something. But yeah, it's crazy the number of people that I've interviewed about that. So it's a lot more rare. When I go through my books and I go through all the stories that I've collected, ghosts are definitely the most I get. And then, probably UFO, and then Bigfoot, and it gets thinner and thinner, the number of, as how rare it is. But that was one that was actually more prevalent than I thought, really was. So
Is there more to the story? Because all that I know about the black-eyed kids is that there are kids knocking on your door and they want to get in. So, end of the story. People don't let them in, or people let them in. I
yeah.
don't know. And I heard a story about the black-eyed kids where a woman let them in, and the man got scared. And when the kids left, or he threw them out, I don't know, the cats got ill and the cats died eventually and stuff like that. So,
Hmm.
is there more to the story than I know now?
So one of the things that I don't think was really, at least I didn't know from before the Black Eyed Kid stories, like you said, I knew the basics of it until I started interviewing people. But there was something that has been in all of the stories that I've gotten, is that the people after the interaction with the kids, um, for the next day or 2 days, they are extremely ill, almost with really bad flu symptoms, and sleeping for like 24 hours to try and get over it. And that was something I hadn't heard of before, but is in all of the stories that I've talked to and interviewed people after their interaction, they are extremely ill for at least a day, sometimes 2 days, and they will sleep with bad nightmares, most of them for a couple days as well. So the one lady that I interviewed, she was actually this was from Canada, and she had an interaction with some in her car at a park, and she had a nightmare. She had nightmares about the kids and was sick with a fever. And when she finally did wake up, she'd gone to her friend's house. The friend was like, "Oh, we were about to call the doctor." And she looked out and she's like, "Oh, it's still light. I must not have slept very long." And she's like, "Yeah, well, it's daytime, but it's like 2 days after you showed up here. You've been asleep for, you know, 24 or 48 hours. You slept that long." So I found that was really fascinating, and it kind of solidifies each one of their stories because, you know, it's something that they hadn't necessarily heard about either. Some of them never even heard of black-eyed kids or before they read my book, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I had that very same experience." So,
Sounds, yeah, sounds crazy, sounds dangerous. Do we have other phenomena that brings up symptoms like that?
that's the main one um that I get where people get really sick. I know that in a lot of times when it's very traumatic, people will be very drained of their energy and, be very tired like that. But that one's really the only one that I can think of where people end up getting really sick afterwards, at least for a couple days, like a stomach flu kind of symptoms with fever, not be able to eat and just sleeping, sleeping, sleeping. So.
Do people have an idea why they get sick? What causes them to get sick? They don't have no idea.
They don't know. I have a theory, even though I don't have any proof to it. I think that there's something, um, because radiation poisoning
Hmm.
can come across like that. So if there's some sort of radiation associated with these kids, which I say I don't have any proof, but that will like a uh, uh, short-term exposure to radiation will cause that as well. So I guess there are times when people have interactions with UFOs as well. Not that I haven't got any personally, but I have read other ones where they have had a close interaction with UFO and had those very same similar symptoms where they were sick with a type of radiation poison. So that's why I'm thinking perhaps there's some sort of radiation involved with these kids or something
Hmm.
like that. So,
Interesting thoughts. You're right with
yep.
the UFOs. Have you heard about the Virginia UFO case?
Yeah, I have. I've read a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty big case with a lot of informations, but there was
Yeah.
this being that was captured, and it had this greasy, oily skin. And one policeman, he touched the being, and then he died eventually. He got very, very sick over the course of few days or weeks, I don't recall, but eventually he died from it. Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go.
There was another one. Again, this isn't one of my stories, but one that I've read. A hunter in Canada, I believe this was in the 70s, and he found a craft that when he was hunting, it was sitting there, and he approached it, and it vented something out of the side of it, and then took off, and he ended up with round, circles where the vent was on his body that had burned, and then he was also extremely sick for days and days and days afterwards with a type of poisoning like that. So,
Yeah, I remember that case. I don't remember the name, but I remember the
yeah.
you can see the imprints for a long time, and those imprints they come back every year, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, every year the
Yeah.
same time, around the same time, these imprints appear again.
Yep.
Strange. Yeah. In one of your books, you have the case because you mentioned orbs earlier. There's a case that is called the Logan Canyon orb. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So this was a gentleman that I interviewed. At the time, he was a student at Utah State University there in Logan, and he loved to go fishing. And one morning he decided instead of going to class, he was going to go up the canyon fishing. And, it was kind of overcast and rainy. And he's fishing in the river. And off in the trees, he sees this just giant orb going through and the trees. And when he noticed it, it seemed to notice him as well because it turned and came towards him and got so close and then shot up and disappeared. And he was thinking maybe it was people said maybe it was ball lightning or something of that case, but he really felt like there was an intelligence to it, the way it was moving, the way when he noticed it, it felt like it noticed him and came that way. But what's really fascinating is how many of those orb stories that I've collected from Logan Canyon. There is a lot of stories of seeing that ball of light or different sizes. I also interviewed a gentleman, him and his friend were up there um, to get away from the city to record the Newswander comet that was coming through. This has been a couple of years ago. And while they were filming it and just finishing up, they saw a light coming down the mountain and they thought it was somebody with a flashlight. But as it got closer, they realized it was a giant orb and there was nobody with it and it was coming and then started coming again towards them and they hurried and jumped in their car and took off. So
Oh,
it's fascinating to me that Logan Canyon seems to have a lot of these orbs and different things that go on there. So
yeah. Again, we have a specific region where stuff happens. That's
mhm.
interesting. Very
Yep.
interesting. Have you heard about Hessdalen? Does it ring a bell?
It doesn't, no.
There's a lot of phenomena with light balls and orbs there too. Very interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can send
That's
you a
cool.
few informations about Hessdalen. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Have you investigated cattle mutilations too?
I haven't personally, though. I have talked to some people who've had that happen here. There's a place not too far from here. It's called Cub River. And just recently, a couple of years ago, there were a few of the cattlemen up there that had some of their younger cattle mutilated in that way. Um, and usually that's associated with UFOs, and that happens in the West. But again, it's one of those things where it's a cluster. There, it happens for a while to several different animals, and then disappears. Where their organs, certain organs are taken out. There's no blood because it seems to be done with lasers or something so sharp, and it cauterizes it. They'll take part of the lip and tongue and um, it's with there being no blood and oftentimes the cow is the cattle is are fine one day and it's the next day that the farmer finds it and it's this has been happened to it, so it's not it's definitely not easily explained for sure. So
Yeah, that's a very strange phenomena. Sometimes these animals don't have organs anymore, but there is no cut in their body, just a little
yeah.
hole on the bottom of the hoof or so. Or sometimes
Hmm.
there's no blood inside anymore, just a few drops in the heart chamber. And when they um, do a blood test, they find no stress hormones in the blood. That's also so that tells us that whatever happens very fast, obviously.
Yeah, it's crazy, and you wonder what again, it's associated with UFOs, and um, you wonder what it is they're studying or taking or why they're doing it. So,
Yeah. We
well,
live in a very strange but cool world.
yes, I totally agree with that. I love the more spooky and weird it gets, the more I like it. So,
Yeah. I had
yep.
a lot of fun talking to you today, John. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. It was a lot of fun.
You're welcome. Before we go, please tell everybody where they can find you and your books online.
Yes, so you can contact me and find out, a lot of my stuff on strangerbridgeland.com. My books are available on Amazon under Stranger Bridgerland book set. There's seven of them. My eighth one is coming out in a month now, and And then you can also follow me on TikTok at it's at Olsen J243. I do some stuff on there as well, and I have a few signed books on there as well. So that's the best place to find out what's going on and when my books are coming out and how to get a hold of me. If any of your readers have or listeners have a story they want to share, I'd love to hear it. So
Links in the description, guys. Yeah, again, thank you so much. Please stay with me for 2 more minutes, okay?
yes.